It's time to grab your cargo pants that don't fit anymore or you just don't like the look of. In this video we'll be turning our cargo pants into a skirt instead. The seam ripper is literally going to be your best friend for this. So I am seam ripping the crotch of our pants because obviously we want to turn that part into a skirt eventually. And I'm also seam ripping the sides. And to do that I did have to take off like the pocket flaps just because the pants are too small for me. So I'm going to add a panel or a strip to the side instead to make it a tiny bit bigger. So to do that, to cut out my panels, I wanted them to be about 1.5 inches thick. So I've cut out 3 inches in terms of the width, and then it's going to be folded in half, so it's going to be 1.5, and I've made it as long as I can kind of get it just because I want it to kind of be like a dangling strip on the side of the skirt, if that makes sense. So I'm cutting out 4 pieces total. Then I'm going to fold one piece on top of the other, right sides facing, as you can see, and I'm going to stitch it at the bottom, and that is going to make these strips longer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and open up those strips, and I'm going to fold it in half, but long ways this time, and then I'm going to stitch down the length of those, and that is going to give us the kind of strip that we want that we can attach to the skirt. So I'm stitching down the length of this, and then I'm going to turn those strips inside out using my safety pin. I'm also going to tuck the ends inside itself like this, and then just stitch along the top to make sure it's all secure, and then we can move on to the next step. Now we're going to work on the skirt piece itself. So I'm cutting off, or rather I've measured the length that I want the skirt to be, and I'm just kind of cutting off the excess fabric, so that is a clean cut all the way across. Because there was a pocket on one side, I had to seam rip that pocket off before I could cut out the entirety of that skirt. So once we've cut that, there's kind of like a flap that is going to be left from the crotch because we've seam ripped it. So what I'm going to do, as you can see, is I'm just getting rid of that flap. So I'm kind of marking a straight line down and then pinning that together. As you can see, I'm not going to stitch it just yet, but that is what we will take to our sewing machine to get rid of that excess fabric there, so that the back of the skirt is all neat. What I'm doing as well for the sides, I am cutting it all the way up, so I'm going to have to cut through the pocket to make sure that we can add that panel strips to the side, and that it can add a bit more fabric to the sides just because it's too small for me at the minute. So I'm just going ahead and doing that as well. So then we can take those 2 strips that we have sewn. I've pressed them just to make sure that they are flat off camera, and as you can see, I am pinning those strips to the side. I'm pinning it to one side first all the way down, and then I'm going to pin it to the other side all the way down. The step that I forgot, which I will come back to in a second, is the importance of hemming the skirt before I pin it all the way down, just so that obviously there's not the raw edge showing at the bottom of the skirt. But we'll fix that in a sec. I've moved to my sewing table, and what I'm going to do is just stitch that line at the back that we pinned earlier to get rid of that crotch flap, as I call it, so that it's a straight line at the back. Then I'm going to trim off the excess, and now we can go back to fixing that strip issue that we had earlier. So what I'm doing is I'm just measuring from the waist to where I want the skirt to be on me, and I'm marking that with chalk, and then I'm going to be adding like seam allowance to that point. So kind of what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that I fold up the fabric, and I'm folding it twice, or folding it once and then folding it again, just so that it is at the right length, so the length of the chalked marking, which is where we want our hem to sit. I'm also marking the hem onto the back as well, just so that we can mimic or do the same thing. So I'm going to trim off the excess fabric that we have on the back section, just to make sure that the skirt or the hem isn't too bulky. And then I'm going to repeat the same process of folding the hem up once and then folding it again and then pinning all the way across. Then I'm just going to do a straight stitch to hold that hem in place, and this is what it looks like afterwards. So now I'm jumping in and adding the other strip and then correcting the strip on the other side as well. So as you can see, I'm pinning it to one side all the way down, and then I'm going to pin it to the other side all the way down. I'm using about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, or as little as I can get away with, just because again the skirt is a tiny bit small and I want it to be a tiny bit bigger. Once I have pinned it, I'm going to stitch that in place with a straight stitch, and then again I'm going to correct the sides that we've had to correct on the other side as well, just so that it works with the new hem. So now I'm correcting the front of the skirt. So I want it to be straight or flat, just like we did for the back. So there's naturally going to be that kind of crotch flap at the front as well. So I'm just kind of gauging where that is, and then I'm pinning or using my pins to kind of pin pin the excess that we want to get rid of, and then we can stitch that down as well. So now kind of doing finishing touches. I am re-adding the pocket flap for this side, and so to do that I'm kind of putting it where I want it to be. I'm going to open up the flap and then pin it, as you can see here, and then I'm going to stitch along that line and then fold it back down and stitch along that line to hold it in place as well. Hopefully the visuals help explain that tiny bit better. At this point you want to check for any raw edges or hems or any bits that you've kind of left that aren't neat, and kind of neaten those up as well. So for me that was kind of like the strips. And then the grand finale, this is what the skirt came out looking like. Make sure you subscribe if you found this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys!